am so sorry.
Step away from my dog.
Clara Hayes had been a maid at Matteo Moretti's estate for exactly 6 days when she emptied 2 buckets of warm water over the most dangerous dog in the city. 1 second, she was crossing the frozen service courtyard with cleaning supplies balanced against her hip. The next, her worn shoe slipped, both buckets flew from her hands, and nearly 4 gallons of soapy water crashed over a massive black cane corso. Every servant in the courtyard stopped breathing. Bruno weighed almost 150 pounds, obeyed only the Mafia Boss who owned him, and had sent the last professional groomer away with 8 stitches. Clara remained on the ground, staring into the dog's dark eyes while water dripped from his face like an insult. "I am so sorry," she whispered. Bruno lowered his head and released a growl that vibrated through the stone beneath her palms. Then a colder voice came from the doorway behind him. "Step away from my dog." Clara looked up and saw Matteo Moretti watching her, the feared Mafia boss whose name made powerful men lower their voices. He stood beneath the stone archway in a black overcoat, broad-shouldered and completely still, with 2 armed men several steps behind him. Snow had begun collecting in his dark hair, but he appeared not to notice the cold. Clara had seen him only twice since taking the job. The first time had been from the far end of a dining room while he spoke quietly to men who looked terrified to interrupt him. The second had been through a window as he crossed the gardens with Bruno at his side. She had expected the owner of such an estate to move loudly, surrounded by orders and attention. Matteo did not. Rooms became quieter before he entered them. Clara placed one hand on the wet stone and tried to rise. Her shoe slipped again. Bruno's growl deepened. "I said step away," Matteo repeated. "I'm trying." Heat climbed into Clara's face. She could feel every pair of eyes in the courtyard. The gardeners, the kitchen staff, the guards, and Bianca Russo, the elegant woman who had arrived for breakfast in a white coat and heels too delicate for winter. Clara could already hear the laughter that would follow her into the staff hall. 6 days. Grant had said she would not last 1 week. She had hated him for saying it, and hated herself more for remembering it now. "She can't even stand up," Bianca said, not quite softly enough. "Perhaps the dog will finish what the tray did yesterday." A few servants looked down. Clara knew exactly which tray she meant. She had dropped a silver coffee tray during Bianca's visit the morning before. Nothing had broken, but the cups had rattled loudly enough for every person in the breakfast room to turn. Bianca had smiled and called her charmingly hopeless. Matteo had said nothing then. Now his gaze moved briefly toward Bianca, and the small smile vanished from her face. Clara pushed herself upright. Bruno did not move. His body remained low, thick muscles rigid beneath his soaked black coat. But instead of looking at his teeth, Clara looked at the rest of him. His ears were pinned back. His breathing was too fast. His left hind leg trembled each time he shifted his weight. A leather lead hung from the hand of the estate groomer standing near the stable doors, and every time the metal clasp clicked, Bruno's eyes moved toward it. "He isn't angry because he's wet," Clara said. "He's afraid someone is going to restrain him again." Matteo's attention sharpened. "You reached that conclusion while lying on the ground?" "I had a good view." Bianca gave a short laugh. No one joined her. Matteo stepped into the courtyard. Bruno glanced toward him but did not relax. "Bruno does not fear water." "Maybe not," Clara said. "But he fears what usually happens around it." The groomer lifted the lead. Bruno's lips pulled back. Clara pointed before thinking. Put it down." The groomer stared at her. "You have worked here 6 days. The dog doesn't know how long I've worked here." "Enough," Matteo said. The single word silenced everyone. He looked at the groomer. "Put it down." The man lowered the lead. Bruno's growl faded, though his breathing remained fast. Clara rubbed her damp palms against her skirt. She knew she should apologize, collect the buckets, and disappear into the laundry wing before someone decided humiliation was not sufficient punishment. Instead, she looked at the dog's soaked coat and the ice forming around the edges of the courtyard. "He needs to be dried." Matteo's expression revealed nothing. "That is not your concern." "I made him wet." "You did. Then let me fix it." Bianca turned toward Matteo. "Surely you are not considering allowing the maid who cannot cross a courtyard to handle Bruno." Clara's face burned. but Mateo kept looking at the dog. The last groomer required surgery? The last groomer tried to drag him into a metal tub, Clara said. I saw the room yesterday when I was cleaning the west wing. The floor is slippery, the spray is loud, and there are restraint hooks on the wall. If his hip hurts, every part of that room tells him he is about to be trapped while someone causes more pain. The estate veterinarian, Dr. Ethan Hale, had mentioned Bruno's arthritis to the kitchen staff that morning. Clara had not meant to listen, but Bruno's name had carried through the open door while she polished the hall table. Mateo's eyes narrowed. And you believe you can do better? Clara looked at Bruno. Water ran from his jaw and formed a dark pool around his paws. I believe I can make it less frightening. That is not the same thing. No, she said. It's more important. For several seconds, the only sound in the courtyard was the wind. Then Mateo removed his gloves. What do you need? Bianca stared at him. Clara was nearly as surprised. The laundry room, rubber floor mats, warm water in buckets, not the spray hose, towels, no chains. No one inside except me. Mateo's gaze dropped to her wet shoe. You can barely remain standing. I'm better when nobody is watching. Everyone is watching. Then tell them to stop. One of Mateo's guards coughed into his hand. It might have been an attempt to hide a laugh. Mateo's mouth moved by the smallest degree. Leo, he said without looking away from Clara. Clear the laundry room. Bianca stepped closer. Mateo, this is absurd. Then you are free not to watch. 10 minutes later, Clara stood inside the estate laundry room with her sleeves rolled to the elbows and her heart beating hard enough to make her hands unsteady. The staff had spread thick rubber runners across the stone floor. 4 buckets of warm water waited beside a low wooden platform. Towels had been stacked near the dryers. The door remained wide open. Bruno stood in the hallway, his wet coat dripping, refusing to cross the threshold. Mateo stood several feet behind him. Leo and the groomer waited farther down the corridor. Bianca had ignored Mateo's suggestion and remained near the stairs. He will not enter, the groomer said. Clara knelt beside one of the buckets and tested the temperature with her elbow. Then he won't get a bath. You insisted on doing this. I insisted no one force him. She squeezed a soft cloth, set it on the floor near the doorway, and sat with her back against a dryer. She did not call Bruno. She did not look directly at him. She began humming under her breath as she folded one of the muddy towels from the courtyard. The tune was simple, only 4 notes repeated slowly. She had learned it at the municipal animal shelter where she had volunteered before her divorce. The older dogs had liked the sound. So had Clara, especially on days when she could not stop hearing Grant's voice inside her own head. You make everything harder. You turn simple things into disasters. People have to clean up after you. Bruno's breathing filled the doorway. Clara folded another towel. 2 minutes passed. Bianca shifted impatiently. This is ridiculous. Mateo raised one hand without looking at her. Silence returned. Clara hummed. A wet paw touched the rubber mat. She did not react. Bruno placed one foot inside the room, then another. His head remained low. His eyes moved between Clara, the buckets, and the open door behind him. Clara continued folding until his nose touched the cloth she had left on the floor. That's all right, she said softly. You can inspect everything. I would too. Bruno sniffed the bucket. Clara dipped her fingertips into the water and let a few drops fall across the mat. No spray, no sudden noise. The dog moved closer. When he reached her, she held the cloth near his nose. He smelled it, then looked at her. I'm going to start with your shoulder, she whispered. Not your leg, not your face, nothing you can't see. She waited until his breathing slowed before pressing the warm cloth lightly against his coat. Bruno's muscles tightened. Clara stopped immediately. See? You can say no. His eyes remained on her. After several seconds, he leaned the smallest fraction toward the cloth. Clara exhaled. She washed one shoulder, then the other, moving slowly and speaking about things that did not matter. She told him the laundry room smelled better when Rosa used lemon soap instead of pine. She told him the left dryer made a terrible sound during the last 10 minutes of a cycle. She told him the bread at the staff table was too hard unless Jonah warmed it near the stove. Bruno listened as though her words contained instructions worth considering. Matteo watched from the hall. Clara could feel his attention, but she forced herself to keep her eyes on the dog. The moment she looked toward the audience, the old trembling returned. With Bruno, her hands remained steady. She washed the mud from his back, chest, and powerful shoulders. When she reached his hind leg, she slowed. A faint scar crossed the hip beneath the wet fur. Bruno's breathing changed. "I see it," she murmured. "We'll go around." Instead of lifting the leg, she worked the cloth beneath him without moving the joint. Bruno lowered himself onto the mat. His body was still tense, but he had stopped looking at the open door. Clara rinsed the cloth and reached for a towel. Her knee caught the edge of the bucket. Water spilled across the rubber mat. She slid sideways. Before she struck the floor, Bruno moved. His huge body pressed against her hip, taking her weight and keeping her upright. Clara grabbed his shoulder and found herself half leaning over the dog who had once put a groomer in the hospital. Bruno stood completely still beneath her. A startled laugh escaped her. "So I'm bathing you and you're keeping me alive. Fair trade." Something changed in the hallway. Clara looked up. Matteo was smiling. It was not the polite movement she had seen him use with guests. It appeared briefly and unexpectedly, softening a face most people associated with consequences. Then it was gone. Clara finished rinsing Bruno with a pitcher. She pressed towels against his coat instead of rubbing. When he was mostly dry, she sat on the floor and wrapped a final towel around his shoulders. Bruno lowered his massive head into her lap. No one spoke. Clara placed one hand gently behind his ear. "You're not so frightening," she said. Bruno closed his eyes. Bianca made a disbelieving sound. Matteo entered the room. He stopped several feet away. "Bruno." The dog opened one eye. "Come." Bruno did not move. Matteo's eyebrows lifted. In the 11 years Bruno had been at his side, the dog had ignored orders only when injured or unconscious. "Bruno, come." The dog pressed his head more firmly against Clara's knees. Leo looked down to hide his expression. Bianca stared as if she had witnessed an act of treason. Clara rubbed the damp fur behind Bruno's ear. "I think he wants 5 more minutes." Matteo looked at her. "He has never wanted 5 more minutes with anyone." "Maybe nobody asked." Clara expected anger. Instead, Matteo studied the dog for a long moment. 5 minutes, he said. He turned and walked away. Bruno stayed for 47. By the time Clara finished the laundry and changed out of her wet uniform, evening had settled over the estate. Snow drifted through the courtyard lights. The main house glowed above the gardens, all stone, glass, and carefully controlled warmth. Clara lived in a small staff cottage near the eastern wall, a 10-minute walk from the service entrance. The cottage had 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a fireplace that smoked when the wind changed, and a front step that leaned slightly to the left. Clara loved it because the key belonged only to her. After 14 years of asking another person whether the thermostat could be raised, whether she could invite a friend inside, whether a blue chair looked foolish beside a brown rug, the cottage's imperfections felt like proof that no one else was deciding what comfort should look like. She crossed the snow with her bag against her chest. Halfway down the path, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Clara stopped. Bruno stopped. "No." The dog blinked. "You live in the mansion." Bruno continued toward her. Clara walked again. So did he. "Your food probably arrives on silver plates." Bruno's breath clouded the air beside her. "My dinner is soup from Tuesday." The dog appeared unmoved. When Clara reached the cottage, she turned and pointed toward the estate. "Home." Bruno sat on the step. "That is not home." He lay down. Clara looked toward the distant house. No guard had followed. She should have called someone. Instead, she opened the door enough to place her bag inside. Bruno stood, pushed past her with the calm confidence of an animal entering property he had already selected, and crossed directly to the fireplace. "Of course," Clara muttered. She lit the kindling, removed her shoes, and found Bruno stretched across the rug as though the cottage had been built around his dimensions. His tail covered half the floor. "This is temporary." Bruno closed his eyes. 15 minutes later, a black vehicle stopped outside. Clara watched through the curtain as Matteo Moretti stepped out alone. He had changed from the overcoat into a dark sweater and tailored trousers. He climbed the uneven porch step, looked at the cottage door, and knocked. Clara opened it only halfway. He followed me. Matteo looked over her shoulder. Bruno did not lift his head. Bruno, one ear moved. Come home. The dog remained beside the fire. Clara folded her arms. He appears to have filed an appeal. Matteo's gaze moved around the cottage. It paused on the second-hand table, the stack of veterinary books beside the sofa, the old kettle on the stove, and the pair of socks drying near the hearth. Clara suddenly saw the room through his eyes and hated that she cared. This is not appropriate, he said. I agree. He takes up most of the floor. Bruno sleeps in the main house. You should explain that to him. I just did. He appears unconvinced. Matteo looked at the dog. He requires medication with his evening meal. What kind? Carprofen. Rosa will bring it. I can walk him back after dinner. He weighs more than you. I am aware. You fell twice today. Only once. The second time he caught me. The corner of Matteo's mouth moved. He looked toward the fire again. May I come in? The question surprised her. Grant had never asked permission to enter any room once he believed it belonged to him. Even after Clara left, he had used the spare key to enter her apartment and remove the coffee maker, because he claimed he had paid for it. She opened the door wider. Matteo stepped inside, wiped his shoes on the mat without being asked, and remained near the entrance. Bruno finally raised his head. You disobeyed me for this? Matteo asked him. Clara placed her bag on the chair. The fire is better here. There are 6 fireplaces in the main house. Perhaps he prefers the company. Matteo looked at her. You believe that after one bath? I believe dogs make decisions faster than men. That has not been my experience. Rosa arrived with a bowl of food, medication, and an expression that suggested she was trying not to enjoy the situation. Bruno ate only after Clara placed the bowl beside the hearth. When Matteo called him afterward, the dog turned his head toward the wall. This is becoming insulting, Matteo said. Clara hid a smile. He is tired. He has slept for 2 hours. Emotionally tired. Matteo stared at her. You invent explanations confidently. You issue orders confidently. We all have talents. He should have left. Clara expected him to. Instead, he removed his coat and sat at the small kitchen table while she reheated soup. She did not offer dinner at first. Men like Matteo Moretti did not eat 3-day-old tomato soup from chipped bowls. Then his stomach made a quiet sound in the silence. Clara looked over her shoulder. Matteo looked offended by his own body. There's enough for 2, she said. I am not hungry. That is what people say when they want to be offered twice. Do you always argue with your employer? Only when he arrives after dinner and claims not to be hungry. She placed a bowl in front of him. Matteo looked at the soup, then at the slice of toasted bread beside it. What is in this? Tomatoes. I can see that. Onions, garlic, basil, and the last of my patience. He tasted it. Clara pretended not to watch. He finished the entire bowl. Bruno slept between them. When Matteo finally left, it was nearly 10. The dog remained by the fire. He will return before morning, Matteo said at the door. You sound hopeful. I sound certain. Bruno did not return. Clara woke at 5:30 to a crunching sound in the kitchen. She sat upright, heart racing, and reached for the heavy flashlight beside her bed. For one frightened second, she imagined Grant standing beyond the doorway with that patient expression he used before explaining why something was her fault. Then another crunch came. Clara crept into the kitchen and found Bruno beside the counter with half a loaf of bread hanging from his mouth. Crumbs covered the floor. The dog froze. Clara stared at him. You have a private chef. Bruno finished chewing. You probably eat meat that has its own resume. His tail moved once. Clara put down the flashlight. That bread was supposed to last 3 days. Bruno looked toward the remaining half. Don't even think about it. He took it and walked back to the fire. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. The sound filled the small cottage with something it had been missing. At 7, Matteo knocked. He carried a paper bag from the estate kitchen and looked immediately toward Bruno, who remained on the rug. "He stole my bread," Clara said. Matteo lifted the bag. "I brought a replacement." "Did he confess?" "He has never believed in apologies." "That explains the company he keeps." Matteo handed her the bag. Inside were 2 loaves, fruit, cheese, and a tin of coffee that cost more than Clara's weekly grocery budget. She removed 1 loaf. "The rest goes back." "Why?" "Because I lost half a loaf, not the contents of a market." "It is food. It is too much. You bathed a dog everyone else feared, and you pay me wages, not for that." "Then consider the missing bread your payment." Matteo looked as though no one had ever returned groceries to him before. "You are difficult." Clara's smile faded. Grant had said the same thing whenever she questioned him. Matteo saw the change. "That was not an insult," he said. "It usually is." He did not ask who had taught her that. He took the bag without argument and left 1 loaf on the table. "Bruno needs his medication at 8. "I know." "You have known him 1 day?" "He gave me a tour of his medical needs while stepping on my foot." Matteo glanced down at her worn shoes. A split had formed near the left sole. Those caused the fall. Clara shifted her foot beneath the chair. "The ice caused the fall. The shoe helped. Do not buy me shoes." Matteo's eyebrows rose. "I did not offer." "You looked like you were about to solve something." "I often look that way. Resist it." He left at 7:10. He returned that evening to collect Bruno. The dog refused again. On the 3rd evening, Matteo brought a leather lead. Bruno carried it into the cottage and dropped it in the fireplace wood basket. On the 4th, Matteo sent Leo with roasted beef. Bruno ate the meat and remained beside Clara. On the 5th, Matteo came himself and found Clara brushing the dog on the porch. "You are encouraging him," he said. "I am removing loose fur from my dog. He keeps depositing it on my furniture." Matteo watched Bruno lean into the brush. "He has never allowed that near his hip. I don't begin with the place that hurts." The words settled between them. Matteo's gaze moved to Clara's face. "Is that an animal handling principle?" "It should be a human one." By the end of the 1st week, Bruno had established a routine. He slept beside Clara's fireplace, followed her to the main house each morning, remained near the laundry room during her housekeeping shift, and returned to the cottage with her at night. He ignored everyone who attempted to change this arrangement. Matteo began joining the evening walk from the service entrance. At first, he spoke only about Bruno's medication, exercise, and food. Then he began staying for coffee. 2 days later, he accepted soup again. By the 3rd week, Clara no longer pretended surprise when she heard his knock at 7:30. She kept a 3rd bowl near the stove and told herself it was because Matteo always arrived hungry. The cottage changed around Bruno first. Clara moved the small table to make space for his bed. She laid runners across the floor so his hip would not slip. She cut one of her old blankets into a padded cover. Matteo sent an orthopedic dog bed from the city. Clara returned it unopened. "It cost more than my car," she said. "Your car is 12 years old. That does not improve your argument. The bed supports his joints. Then put it in the mansion." Matteo looked at Bruno, who was sleeping with his head on Clara's folded coat. "He will not use it there." "That sounds like a family disagreement." The next evening, the expensive bed arrived again without packaging. A note was attached in Matteo's sharp handwriting. "It belongs to Bruno. Argue with him." Clara placed it near the fire. Bruno ignored it for 3 days, then slept on it after Clara covered it with her old blanket. Matteo said nothing, but she saw satisfaction in his eyes. Clara's clumsiness did not disappear. She dropped a spoon when Matteo entered the kitchen unexpectedly. She caught her sleeve on a door handle during a staff meeting. At a lunch attended by 3 men from Chicago, she nearly spilled coffee when one of them laughed too loudly behind her, but Matteo began noticing the pattern. Clara never stumbled when carrying medicine to Bruno. Her hands did not shake while cleaning a cut on the gardener's palm. When Jonah burned his wrist on a tray, Clara was the first person to put it beneath cool water, the first to remember he was allergic to one kind of ointment, and the only one who noticed he had not eaten since morning. She became clumsy when she believed someone was waiting for her to fail. The rest of the time, she was the steadiest person in the room. One afternoon, Matteo found her in the supply closet counting folded towels from memory. 312 bath sheets, she said without looking at the shelves. 280 hand towels. 24 need replacing. The invoice says 38. How do you know? Because I wash them. Rosa approves the invoices. Rosa manages 60 employees. She cannot count every towel. Matteo picked up Clara's small notebook. Each page contained quantities, dates, stains that could not be removed, and notes about which staff members required gloves because of skin reactions. You have been tracking this since your second day. Clara took the notebook back. The detergent order was wrong. Why did you not tell anyone? I told the assistant manager. What did he say? She looked down. He said the new maid should learn how not to drop trays before auditing the house. Matteo's face became still. What is his name? No. I asked a question. And I am telling you not to fire him because he was rude to me. That was not the question. It was the next step in your head. Matteo did not deny it. What do you want? I want the invoice corrected and gloves ordered for the kitchen staff. Nothing for yourself? Clara looked at her taped thumbnail. A job where one mistake does not erase everything I do correctly. Matteo's gaze held hers. You already have that. The answer affected her more than she wanted. She turned back to the towels. The next day, Matteo offered her a separate paid position overseeing Bruno's care and household inventory for 3 hours each afternoon. Clara asked for the terms in writing. You do not trust me, he said. They stood in his office, a room of dark wood, city maps, and windows overlooking the frozen lake. I trust paper when people's moods change. Mine does not. That is what people with power believe. Matteo watched her for a moment, then opened a drawer and took out a blank contract. Write the terms. Clara hesitated. You want me to write them? You said you trust paper. Make paper you trust. She wrote that the work would be separate from housekeeping, that she could refuse any handling method she considered harmful, that Bruno would not be restrained without medical necessity, that her hours would remain fixed, and that either party could end the arrangement with 7 days' notice. At the bottom, she added, My private life will not be investigated without immediate safety cause. Matteo read the line twice. You believe I investigate everyone. You are Matteo Moretti. That is not an answer. It is the answer the entire city would give. He signed the contract. Immediate safety cause will be defined by you. Clara looked up. Why? Because if I define it alone, the condition means nothing. That evening, she made fresh soup. Matteo arrived with a bottle of wine. Clara refused the wine and gave him tea. He drank it without complaint. Their lives developed small routines neither acknowledged. Matteo knocked even when the door stood open. Clara left a clean towel beside his chair on rainy nights. Bruno positioned himself between them during dinner, head resting on Clara's foot and one paw touching Matteo's shoe. Matteo learned how to split firewood without ruining his cuffs. Clara learned that he removed his watch before helping with dishes, though he always claimed he was not helping. She learned he disliked cinnamon, slept fewer than 5 hours, and read every document twice when worried. He learned she counted coins at the grocery store, kept a jar labeled van above the refrigerator, and dreamed of one day running a mobile service for old or traumatized dogs whose owners could not afford private care. How much do you need? He asked one night. Clara covered the jar with a dish towel. Do not. I asked a question. And your face is trying to write a check. It is a useful face. Not in my kitchen. He smiled. She had begun measuring her evenings by how often she caused that expression. The first time Bruno became jealous, Clara was kneeling beside the porch, feeding an orange stray cat with a torn ear. The cat had appeared 3 mornings earlier and refused to come inside. Clara called him Pip because his meow sounded too small for the rest of him. On the 4th day, Pip climbed onto Clara's lap. Bruno came around the corner, stopped, and stared. Be polite, Clara warned. Bruno moved forward and inserted his entire body between Clara and the cat. Pip climbed onto Clara's shoulder and hissed. Bruno leaned harder against her knees. "You weigh 150 pounds, she said. "He weighs 6. Mateo's voice came from the path. Bruno has never considered proportional response important. Clara looked up. Mateo wore a charcoal coat and carried 2 folders beneath one arm. His gaze moved from the cat on her shoulder to Bruno pressed against her legs. "He is jealous," Mateo said. "Of a 6-pound cat? I understand the feeling." Clara's pulse changed. Mateo seemed to realize what he had admitted. He looked toward the cottage. "I brought the inventory reports." "You came at 7 in the morning to deliver folders?" "I was nearby." "You live 300 yards away." "Very nearby." Pip jumped from Clara's shoulder and rubbed against Mateo's polished shoe. Mateo looked down as if threatened by a new kind of negotiation. Clara laughed. The sound made him forget the cat. A week later, Dr. Ethan Hale visited to examine Bruno's hip. Ethan was in his late 30s, friendly, blonde, and willing to kneel in the mud without treating it as an act of sacrifice. He listened while Clara explained how Bruno shifted weight after long walks. He asked her opinion twice and wrote down both answers. "You should have trained professionally," he said. "I cleaned kennels at a shelter and watched people who knew more than I did. That is how most people learn. My ex-husband said, talking to animals was the only conversation I could not ruin." Ethan's smile faded. "Your ex-husband sounds charming." He thought so. Mateo approached from the main house, just as Ethan made Clara laugh over a joke about Bruno's refusal to step onto the scale. Bruno stood between them, but Mateo's attention remained on the veterinarian's hand resting briefly against Clara's elbow. "Is the examination finished?" Mateo asked. Ethan glanced at his watch. "We started 6 minutes ago." Bruno dislikes long appointments. Bruno is asleep. The dog was stretched on the mat with his chin on Clara's boot. Clara looked at Mateo. "Are you in a hurry?" "No." "Then why do you sound like someone has stolen your chair?" Ethan hid a smile. Mateo did not. "I dislike unnecessary touching." Clara looked at Ethan's hand, which had already moved. Bruno didn't object. "I was not referring to Bruno." Silence followed. Ethan cleared his throat and returned to the examination. Later, after he left, Clara carried the medication into the cottage. Mateo followed. "He asked you to dinner. You were listening?" "He asked within 20 feet of my dog. That is not a legal privacy boundary." "Did you accept?" Clara placed the medicine on the shelf. "Bruno is jealous of Pip. Are you jealous of Dr. Hale?" "No." "You answered too quickly." "I answer most things quickly." "Not when I asked what you feel about me." Mateo became very still. Clara regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. She turned toward the sink. "Forget it." "No." His voice was lower. "I will not." She faced him. The cottage suddenly felt smaller. Bruno slept near the fire, unaware that the silence above him had changed. Mateo stepped closer, but stopped beyond her reach. "I come here every evening after spending the day surrounded by people who calculate the value of every word," he said. "You tell me my dog is dramatic. You serve me soup in bowls that do not match. You return everything I buy unless I can prove it belongs to Bruno. You speak to me as though my name does not require a different version of you." Clara's throat tightened. "That is not an answer. I am jealous of the veterinarian." Her heart gave one hard beat. Mateo continued. "I disliked the way he made you laugh. I disliked that he touched your arm. I disliked that he asked you to dinner and that you considered it for 3 seconds before refusing. I refused because I have plans." "With whom?" "Bruno?" Mateo looked at the dog. "He is becoming an obstacle. You brought him into my life. I am beginning to understand the consequences." Clara looked down, because looking at him had become dangerous. "Jealousy is not love." "No," Mateo's voice softened. "But it is honest." He left before she had to answer. That night, Clara found a voicemail from Grant. She had not spoken to him in almost 4 months. His name on the screen still caused her shoulders to rise. "I heard you're cleaning for Moretti now. his recorded voice said. Try not to break anything expensive. Men like that don't find your accidents charming for long. You always mistake attention for affection. Clara, I'm only telling you because someone should. She listened twice, not because she believed him, but because old injuries often asked to be touched after they had closed. She deleted the message, then recovered it from the trash and played it again. Bruno lifted his head from the rug. Clara turned the phone face down. It's nothing. The dog came to her chair and placed his chin on her knee. A knock sounded. Matteo stood outside with snow on his shoulders. May I come in? Not tonight. He studied her face but did not look toward the phone. Are you safe? Yes. Do you need anything? No. All right. He stepped back. Clara had expected another question. The absence of it hurt in a different way. Matteo, he stopped. Do you ever hear someone's voice after they're gone? He looked at her for a long moment. Every day. How do you make it stop? I do not. His gaze moved toward Bruno behind her. I decide whether it belongs in the room. Clara looked down at the phone. My former husband says I ruin things. Does that voice belong here? Tears threatened. She hated them. Sometimes it sounds like mine. Matteo remained on the porch. He did not enter. Then borrow another until you can recognize your own. Whose? Mine. His voice was quiet, absolute. You do not ruin rooms, Clara. You change what people notice inside them. He left before she could answer. The next morning, she played Grant's voicemail once more. Then she deleted it permanently. Spring arrived slowly around Lake Como. Ice disappeared from the garden paths. The estate hosted its first outdoor charity luncheon in April, raising money for a city animal shelter. Clara had spent 2 weeks organizing supply counts and preparing a quiet area for Bruno away from the crowd. Bianca Russo arrived in pale green silk, followed by photographers and women who carried dogs small enough to fit inside handbags. She had not forgiven Clara for surviving the courtyard accident without losing her job. She had forgiven her even less for becoming the person Matteo visited every evening. The famous dog maid, Bianca said when she found Clara near the terrace. I hear Bruno sleeps in your cottage now. Clara kept arranging water bowls. He sleeps wherever he decides. Matteo usually values obedience. Perhaps Bruno is expanding his education. Bianca's smile tightened. You should be careful. Men like Matteo enjoy unusual things briefly. A nervous maid who tames a dog is charming until the novelty ends. Clara's hand stopped over the bowls. Grant's voice tried to enter the room through Bianca's mouth. Men like that don't find your accidents charming for long. Before Clara could answer, a waiter passing behind her caught the edge of the table. One bowl fell and shattered. Every head on the terrace turned. Bianca laughed softly. There she is. Heat rushed into Clara's face. Her hands went cold. For one terrible second, she was back in Grant's dining room, holding a broken plate while he explained to friends that Clara could turn breathing into an emergency. I'm sorry, she began automatically. Then Bruno's heavy body pressed against her leg. He had crossed the entire terrace from Matteo's side. The crowd moved away as he sat beside Clara and looked up at her. The trembling in her hands eased. She knelt to collect the larger pieces. Matteo's voice came from behind her. Leave it. Clara looked up. He was not speaking to her. He was looking at Bianca. She did not drop the bowl. Bianca's expression hardened. I did not say she did. You laughed as though you had been waiting. The terrace fell silent. Clara stood. I can answer for myself. Matteo looked at her. Yes, he stepped back. The simple movement gave the moment to her. Clara faced Bianca. I am clumsy sometimes. Her voice shook once. She let it. I drop things when people are watching me as if one mistake will explain my entire character. But I am not ashamed of that anymore. Do you know why? Bianca did not answer. Clara rested one hand on Bruno's head. Because when something living is frightened or in pain, my hands do not shake at all. Bruno leaned into her. So you can keep watching the glasses. I'll keep watching what matters. No one laughed. Bianca's face flushed. Matteo said nothing, but pride warmed his eyes. Later, during the shelter presentation, Dr. Hale introduced Clara as the person responsible for Bruno's rehabilitation. She had not known he planned to do it. Guests asked questions. Clara answered without dropping the microphone. She explained choice-based handling, pain responses, and why fear was often mislabeled as aggression. Mateo stood near the back, not beside her, giving her space to own the room. Afterward, Clara found him in the quiet corridor outside the library. "Did you arrange that?" she asked. "No." "You knew?" "Yes." "You could have warned me. You would have found a reason to refuse." "Possibly." "You were excellent." Clara looked down. "I almost apologized for the bowl. But you did not. Bruno helped. Bruno only stood beside you." Mateo stepped closer. "You did the rest." Clara lifted her eyes. The corridor was empty. Music drifted faintly from the terrace. "You stood where I could see you," she said. "I thought you might want that." "I did." She closed the distance between them before courage could become another object she dropped. Clara kissed him. Mateo went completely still. His hands remained at his sides until she touched his wrist and whispered, "You can touch me." One hand settled carefully at her waist. The other rose to her cheek, rough fingers gentle against her skin. The kiss deepened slowly, not because Mateo took more, but because Clara gave it. When they separated, his forehead rested against hers. "The veterinarian will be disappointed," he murmured. Clara laughed softly. "You're still jealous." "Violently. That is not reassuring from a mafia boss." "I am controlling it. Keep practicing." "With you, apparently I have no other choice." Their first real intimacy did not happen in a bedroom. It happened 2 nights later during a thunderstorm. Bruno woke before midnight and began pacing the cottage. Lightning flashed across the lake. Each thunderclap made his body jerk. Clara tried closing the curtains, but the sound continued. Bruno overturned a chair and pressed himself into the narrow space beside the pantry, panting hard. Mateo arrived through the rain after Clara called Rosa for the emergency medication. He entered the cottage, saw Bruno shaking, and used the command that had worked during gunfire and conflict for years. "Bruno, down!" The dog paced faster. "Bruno." Mateo's voice sharpened. "Stop sounding like the storm," Clara said. He turned. "He needs structure. He needs you to stop making the room louder." Another thunderclap shook the windows. Bruno barked and snapped at the air. Mateo moved toward him. Clara caught his arm. "Sit." "Clara." On the floor, slowly. No one ordered Matteo Moretti to sit. Clara saw the resistance move through his face. Then he lowered himself onto the rug. She sat on Bruno's other side, leaving enough distance for the dog to choose. "Put your hand on the floor," she said. "Not on him." Matteo obeyed. Clara began the same 4-note hum she had used during the bath. She slowed her breathing deliberately. "He is matching us," she whispered. "Not yet. He will." Bruno's pacing became smaller. He circled once, then stopped between them. Clara placed one hand lightly against his chest. "Now," Matteo added his hand beside hers. Bruno's heartbeat hammered beneath their palms. "Slow," Clara said. "Show him there is no chase." Matteo's breathing deepened. Bruno's followed. Another thunderclap rolled across the lake. The dog flinched but did not rise. Minutes passed. His body gradually settled between them. Clara and Matteo remained on the floor with their hands touching over Bruno's chest. "He should be matching you," Matteo said quietly. "Tonight he needs both of us." Matteo looked at her across the dog. Lightning illuminated the cottage, then darkness returned. "Who does this for you?" he asked. "What?" "Who sits beside you when the room becomes louder than the danger?" Clara tried to make a joke. None came. "Nobody." The word sounded too honest. "People usually wait until I drop something." Matteo's gaze held hers. "Then they have been watching the wrong moment." Clara looked down at Bruno. "Grant used to stand behind me while I cooked. He would wait for me to spill or burn something, then say he knew it would happen. Eventually my hands shook before I touched anything." Matteo's jaw tightened. "Why did you stay?" "Because leaving felt like admitting he had been right about me. That I could not manage a home, money, or life alone. And now?" Clara glanced around the small cottage. The uneven table, the kettle, Pip sleeping on the chair. Bruno between them. Matteo on her floor with rain still darkening his shirt. Now I think I was managing too much. Mostly him. Mateo's hand shifted over hers. Everyone I know met me after my name became useful or frightening, he said. Bruno did not, Clara waited. I found him behind a warehouse when I was 24. My oldest brother had sold my location to men who wanted me dead. I had one gun, no car, and a wound in my side. Bruno was a half-starved stray with a chain scar around his neck. He could have run. Instead, he lay across the door while I slept. He protected you. He chose me before there was anything to gain. Mateo looked toward the dog. Every human relationship after that required calculation. Bruno never learned how. Clara's throat tightened. Maybe that's why he came here. For soup? For the man you were before everyone became afraid of you. Mateo's eyes returned to her. And what do you see? A man sitting on my floor in wet trousers because his dog is scared of thunder. That is not especially impressive. It is more impressive than armed guards. The storm moved farther across the lake. Bruno fell asleep beneath their hands. Mateo lifted Clara's fingers to his mouth and kissed her knuckles. Nothing more happened that night. It was enough. For 3 weeks, Clara allowed herself to believe that happiness could arrive quietly. Mateo continued his business, much of which Clara understood only through guarded calls and men who entered the estate with tense faces. He never discussed names or details. She did not ask. At the cottage, he became less guarded. He repaired the leaning porch step after Clara nearly tripped. She accused him of removing the cottage's personality. He built a low ramp for Bruno's hip. Pip began sleeping on Mateo's coat whenever he left it on the chair. Clara saved more money in the van jar. Mateo never offered to fill it again. Their kisses remained slow and chosen, usually at the door before he returned to the main house. He did not stay overnight. Clara was not ready to make the cottage another place where a man's belongings slowly replaced hers. Mateo seemed to understand without being told. Then his world noticed her. Leo found the photograph beneath Mateo's office door on a Tuesday morning. It showed Clara standing outside her cottage with Bruno beside her. A red circle had been drawn around her face. On the back, someone had written, "Even monsters can be trained with the right leash." Mateo read the message once. By noon, 4 additional guards had been placed near the eastern wall. By 2, he had decided the cottage was unsafe. By 4, Clara returned from town and found her clothes hanging inside a private suite in the main house. Her books had been arranged on shelves. Her kettle sat on a marble counter. The jar labeled "Van" stood beside an expensive vase, as if someone had tried to reproduce her life from memory. Mateo waited near the windows. "What is this?" Clara asked. "You will stay here until the threat is handled." "What threat?" He handed her the photograph. Fear came first, cold and immediate, then anger. "Why didn't you show me this before moving my things?" "Because there was no decision to make." Clara looked around the room. "You decided. The cottage cannot be secured without turning it into a bunker. Then we could have discussed another place. This is the safest place. For whom? For you. That is not the same as mine." Mateo's expression hardened. "Someone knows where you sleep. And you answered by taking away the place where I sleep. I moved your belongings 300 yards without asking. I was preventing immediate danger." Clara saw the certainty in his face and understood that he expected her fear to make obedience reasonable. Grant had expected the same thing whenever he canceled plans, took her keys, or told friends she was too anxious to drive. "I am only trying to keep you safe." Men loved that sentence because it made control sound generous. "You watched me give Bruno a choice," Clara said quietly. "Every day. You watched me stop when he was afraid. You watched me wait at the doorway instead of pulling him where I wanted him to go. You are not a dog. Then why did you assume I was easier to move than to ask?" Mateo's jaw tightened. "This is different. That is what every controlling person believes. Their reason is special. Their fear is urgent. Their decision is better. Do not compare me to your former husband. Then do not repeat his behavior with more expensive furniture." Anger flashed in Mateo's eyes. Clara's body braced automatically. She hated that he saw it. He stepped back at once. The anger remained, but he forced it away from her. "You are frightened of me." Right now, I am frightened of how easily you decided my no did not matter because you had not bothered to hear it. Silence filled the suite. Bruno stood in the doorway, looking between them. Matteo's voice lowered. What do you want? My things returned. The cottage is unsafe. Then I will leave the estate. His face became completely still. No, Clara flinched. Matteo closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the word had changed him. I know what you meant. She removed the cottage key from her pocket and placed it on the marble counter. I am ending the contract. Clara, 7 days' notice was for employment. My private life does not require notice. Where will you go? That is not your decision. Matteo's hands closed at his sides. I can protect you. Not like this. Bruno needs you. The moment he said it, regret crossed his face. Clara looked at the dog. Pain moved through her chest so sharply she had to breathe around it. Do not use him. You are right. Matteo's answer came immediately. I should not have. I taught him that affection would not become a leash. Her eyes filled. Please do not make me prove the same thing to you. Matteo looked as if she had struck him. I will have Leo take you anywhere you choose. No guards. Clara. One driver. He leaves after I arrive. Every instinct in Matteo resisted. She saw it. Then he nodded. One driver. Clara packed only what belonged to her. Matteo ordered the rest returned to the cottage exactly as it had been. She moved into a small rental at the edge of Bellagio, above an old bakery whose owner allowed Pip to sleep near the back stairs. The room had a narrow bed, a hot plate, and a window overlooking an alley. It was not as peaceful as the estate cottage. It was hers. Clara took temporary work at Dr. Hale's clinic, cleaning kennels in the mornings and assisting with anxious animals in the afternoons. Ethan offered training hours toward a behavioral care certification. She accepted. Matteo did not call. He sent one message the morning after she left. I watched you give Bruno a choice and believed my intentions excused taking yours. They did not. Your belongings have been returned. Your final wages and contract payment are with Rosa. I will not contact you again unless you ask. Clara read the message every night for a week. She did not answer. Bruno waited outside her empty cottage each evening. Matteo knew because he found him there after sunset. The crooked leather tag Clara had made resting against his chest. The tag was uneven, with Bruno's name stamped slightly too high. Matteo had once offered to replace it. Clara had said perfect things made dogs nervous. Now Bruno carried it in his mouth from room to room. He ate less. He slept near the eastern gate. Matteo never photographed him. He never sent Clara a message saying the dog missed her. He refused to turn Bruno's grief into pressure. Instead, he sat beside him some nights and spoke to the only creature who had known him before power. I did what I always do, he said once. I saw danger and removed choice from the room. Bruno looked toward the gate. She told me exactly what mattered. I listened until fear made me forget. The dog rested his head on Matteo's knee. 3 weeks after Clara left, a late spring storm rolled over the lake. Rain struck the clinic windows while Clara helped Ethan calm a terrier, frightened by thunder. She finished after 9, walked home beneath an umbrella, and found enormous muddy paw prints leading up the bakery stairs. Bruno lay outside her rented room, soaked, exhausted, and bleeding lightly from one paw. Clara dropped the umbrella. Bruno. The dog lifted his head. The crooked leather tag hung from his mouth. Clara fell to her knees. Bruno pressed against her so hard she nearly sat down on the wet floor. She wrapped both arms around his neck. You impossible, ridiculous creature! His body trembled from cold and exertion. How far did you walk? The estate was nearly 9 miles away. Bruno's arthritic hip shook beneath him. Clara opened the door and guided him inside. She dried him with every towel she owned, cleaned the cut on his paw, and called Ethan to ask whether Bruno required emergency treatment. The veterinarian said to keep him warm and monitor his breathing. Clara sat on the floor beside the bed with Bruno's head in her lap. You cannot keep crossing half the lake every time you miss someone, she whispered. The dog closed his eyes. Headlights appeared in the alley below. Clara's heart knew who had arrived before footsteps reached the stairs. Matteo stopped outside the open doorway. Rain darkened his hair and coat. He looked at Bruno first, confirming the dog was alive, then at Clara. He did not enter. Is he hurt? A cut paw. His hip is trembling. He should not have made that walk. He pushed through the eastern gate when lightning damaged the lock. You followed him? Not closely enough to make him run faster. Matteo looked at the cramped room. Pip hissed from the windowsill. Bruno remained with his head in Clara's lap. Bruno, Matteo said softly. Come home. The dog did not move. Clara stroked behind his ear. I think he believes he already is. Matteo absorbed the words without defense. He has been waiting outside the cottage every night. Clara looked up sharply. Why didn't you tell me? Because you asked me not to use him. You could have told me he was unwell. He was grieving, not ill. I did not want his grief to become a message I sent on my behalf. Clara looked down at Bruno. Tears filled her eyes. He should not have had to choose. No. Matteo removed his wet gloves. Neither should you. He remained in the hallway. Water gathered beneath his shoes. May I come in? The question traveled through every memory between them. The cottage door he had once entered after asking. The suite he had filled without permission. The threshold where he now waited, powerful enough to own buildings, and careful enough not to take one step. Clara looked at Bruno, then at Matteo. You can come in. He wiped his shoes on the mat and sat on the floor opposite her. The room was too small for distance, but he created what he could. Matteo placed one hand near Bruno's paw and waited until the dog shifted toward him. I thought protection meant removing every possible risk, he said. That is how I survived. Clara remained silent. I did not understand that safety chosen for someone can feel exactly like captivity. I told you. You did. His eyes lifted to hers. I heard the words. I did not change the instinct. And now? Now I am standing outside doors. A tired smile touched her mouth. That is a beginning. Matteo looked around the room. You are working at Hale's clinic. Yes. He sees you every day. This apology is becoming jealous. The jealousy is separate. Clara laughed despite herself. Bruno's tail thumped once against the floor. Matteo's face softened at the sound. I missed that, he said. Bruno's tail? Your laugh. Clara looked away. I missed you too. That does not erase what happened. I know. I am not returning to the estate as your employee. I know. I want the cottage back only if there is a real lease in my name. Matteo nodded. Rosa drafted one. Market rent, though I dislike the amount. I choose whether to sign. Yes. I am continuing at the clinic. Yes. And if I open my mobile rehabilitation service, you do not buy it. Painfully, Matteo said, Yes. Clara's eyes returned to him. You can invest only if I ask. The terms are written. And I can repay you without remaining in your life. I will hate every part of that document. That is not a no. It is not. The storm rumbled farther away. Bruno slept between them, his body touching both. Matteo reached into his coat and placed the cottage key on the floor, not in Clara's hand. This is yours whether you return or not. Clara looked at the key. Why? Because I had no right to make the first place that belonged to you feel conditional on me. Her throat tightened. She picked up the key. Come back tomorrow, she said. Matteo's face changed. To discuss the lease? For dinner. Are those separate invitations? Do not become difficult. You once told me that was not always an insult. Tomorrow, 7:30. Matteo stood. Bruno did not. He is staying tonight, Clara said. I assumed. And you? Matteo paused near the door. Clara's heart beat hard, but the fear beneath it was different now. It did not feel like losing control. It felt like using it. You should leave tonight. Disappointment moved through his face, but he nodded. All right, Matteo. He looked back. Thank you for leaving when I ask. His voice was quiet. Thank you for asking me to return. He came the next night with no guards at the door, and no gifts, except a loaf of bread Bruno could not steal because Clara placed it in a cabinet. They ate soup at the small table. Mateo told her the thread in the photograph had been traced to a minor rival seeking leverage. The man had been removed from the city without bloodshed, mostly because Clara had once told Mateo that turning every problem into violence proved fear still controlled him. Mateo disliked how often her sentences survived inside his decisions. Clara told him about the certification program and the mobile care plan. He listened without offering money. When dinner ended, they stood near the window while rain tapped gently against the glass. "I love you," Mateo said. Clara's breath caught. He continued before she could answer. "I loved the way Bruno trusted you before I understood why. Then I loved the way you noticed the people my house had taught itself not to see. I loved that you argued with me, returned my groceries, and made a place where my name did not enter before I did." His jaw tightened. "I also loved you badly when fear made me take control. I will not ask you to call that protection." Clara's eyes filled. "I love you too." Mateo did not move. "Are you certain?" "No." A startled expression crossed his face. Clara smiled through tears. "I am certain I love you. I am not certain love will make either of us easy. I have never wanted easy. You like obedience. I am recovering." Clara stepped closer. "May I kiss you?" The warmth entering his eyes made him look younger. "Yes," she kissed him first. His hands remained at his sides until she placed them at her waist. Then he held her carefully, as if closeness were something they were building rather than claiming. Bruno opened one eye from the rug. Pip jumped onto his back and settled between his shoulders. The giant dog sighed but did not move. Clara laughed against Mateo's mouth. "The pack is adjusting." "I object to the cat." Bruno did too. He was right. 3 months later, Clara signed the lease on the estate cottage. She did not return as a maid. With training from Ethan, savings from her wages, and a small written loan from Mateo that contained so many exit clauses, he called it an insult. She opened Hayes Mobile Canine Care. She specialized in elderly dogs. Trauma cases and animals labeled aggressive after pain had made them afraid. Her first client was a shepherd who had bitten 2 groomers. Her second was a retired police dog who refused to enter vehicles. Her third belonged to an elderly widow who could pay only in homemade jam. Clara accepted the jam. Bruno became the unofficial ambassador of the service. He lay calmly near frightened dogs, demonstrating that large bodies did not have to mean danger. Pip rode inside the van twice before Clara discovered him and banned him from appointments. He ignored the rule. Mateo divided his time between the city and the estate. He still led men who feared disappointing him. He still made decisions Clara did not ask about, and answered calls at hours no respectable business operated. But at the cottage he knocked. He asked before changing things. When he forgot, Clara reminded him. When he became defensive, Bruno left his side and sat beside her, which Mateo considered betrayal. Bianca visited once during another charity event and referred to Clara as the maid who had stolen Matteo Moretti's dog. Bruno crossed the lawn and sat beside Clara. Matteo looked at Bianca and said, "She did not steal him." She noticed pain the rest of us had begun calling disobedience. Clara added, "And I am no longer a maid." She handed Bianca a card for the rehabilitation service. "But if your dog ever needs help, my rates are on the back." Bianca did not take the card. Bruno stared until she did. On the first cold evening of autumn, Clara sat on the cottage porch repairing Bruno's crooked leather tag. Mateo stood near the fence in shirt sleeves, attempting to replace a loose board while refusing advice. "You are holding the hammer wrong," Clara called. "There are limited ways to hold a hammer. You found one of them." Mateo looked toward Bruno. "You brought me here. You are responsible for this." Bruno rested his head on Clara's foot. Pip slept in the dog's bed. "Dinner is ready," Clara said. Mateo abandoned the fence immediately. After soup, he put on his coat and looked toward Bruno. "Come." The dog remained beside the fire. "Bruno, no movement." Clara folded her arms. "He is refusing to leave again." Mateo looked at the dog, then at Clara. He has always had good instincts. Sometimes. Mateo walked to the door but did not open it. "And me? You are improving. Should I leave?" Clara crossed the small room. Months earlier, the question would have frightened her because every answer around Grant had carried consequences. With Matteo, no remained no. Stay remained a choice. She took his coat from his shoulders and hung it beside hers. Not tonight. Matteo touched her cheek. Are you sure? Clara looked around the cottage. Bruno by the fire, Pip occupying Bruno's bed, the uneven table, the jar that had once been labeled Van, now holding fresh flowers. The man who could command half the city waiting for permission, in a room small enough that his shoulder nearly touched the doorframe. Stay, she said. Matteo kissed her slowly. Bruno had refused to leave her after one bath. Matteo Moretti had taken longer to admit it, but once Clara invited him to stay, the most feared man in the city became just as impossible to send home.